What do the Talking Heads, the Ramones, Living Colour, and Mick Jagger all have in common? Today's guest, legendary engineer and record producer Ed Stasium. We sat down with Ed to discuss his long and varied career working with such incredible artists as the Talking Heads, the Ramones, the Smithereens, Mick Jagger, just to name a few. We also discuss his time at the legendary recording studio The Power Station in New York City, and the turning point that changed his outlook on the business side of his career, and much, much more. You don't want to miss it. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sit down with legendary engineer and producer Ed Stasium, who has produced some of the most iconic artists in music, including the Talking Heads, the Ramones, Motorhead, the Misfits, and many, many more. We discussed his extensive career in music, including understanding the most important elements in working with artists in the studio, the importance of having a written agreement when working as a producer, and how to learn to trust your creative instincts is paramount when working with artists, and much, much more. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
What do the Ramones, Talking Heads, Living Colour, Mick Jagger, and Motorhead all have in common? Our featured guest today, the legendary engineer-producer Ed Stasium. He has worked with some of the most seminal acts in music history, and we were able to sit down and talk with him about his incredible journey during one of the most important periods in popular music.
Yeah, this was a great interview. Very insightful. I really loved about what he's talked about with the whole thing with instincts, and I think for our listeners that are comprised of musicians and artists, we do go by our instincts in a lot of things. And in this interview, he kind of reveals how that has led him to a very successful career.
Absolutely. And it's such an interesting point, Eric, because when he spoke about that, he also spoke about the career that he had as a result of trusting his instincts.
Yes. As
you'll learn in the interview, when he speaks about just the synergy and the, what's the word? I can't grasp it right now. The where it all just comes together.
Right.
The synchronicity.
The
synchronicity of just certain things about, finding records and then meeting this one on the street corner at a restaurant and it coming together to produce one of the great albums as the story with, Living Colour happened. So this was a really great one.
Yeah, it gets back to what I think I've talked to you in private about trusting your instincts and to not say no to anything. I think I've told you that, where that kind of, I learned that the hard way. And I think, the listeners out there are going to get this, especially the producers and engineers that are out there listening. This is going to be a great interview that you don't want to miss. So Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Ed Stasium.
Welcome, Ed. I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. Thank you for doing this.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Rich and Eric. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. I want to begin with a question that I always ask our guests first when we do these, which is, when did you know that music or the music business was going to be your career path? And did it choose you, or did you choose it?
No, it chose me. It was genetic. It really was. When I was a kid, I would pantomime with Bing Crosby and Sinatra, and especially Louis Prima. I would mime just a gigolo. And, when I was like 3-4 years old. There's a picture of me with a toy telephone, and I'm singing into it as a microphone. I mean, I never realized that I would have a career about it. I just was following my bliss. Music, I took it first. I took piano lessons. My parents were very supportive. And when I wanted to take piano, I got interested in keyboards and pianos. It's kind of a long story. I know we should keep it a little bit short. But it was, in Pennsylvania. It's a funny little story. There was my parents came from a little town called Einan in the Wilkes-Barre-Scranton area, and my dad used to hang out at this guy Alan Carpedetti's house, and he built a man cave, and this is like in the 50s. He built a man cave. He built it adjacent to his home, and there was a pool table in there. They had a bar. All the guys would hang out. My uncles, and it was like. It was a little club, and in the adjacent home, there was a hallway that went through, and there was an old piano in there, and I started playing that piano, and Alan Carpentetti showed me chopsticks, as any good student of music should learn the first thing, and I just picked it up that way. I got interested in piano. My parents found through my aunt a piano that a church was giving away, and they brought it to the home, and they had it tuned up, and I started taking piano lessons. There was a music studio, which I'm sure back in the 50s, lots of towns, I don't know if these exist anymore, but there were, it was called Rufino and DeSorbo Music and Dance Studios. So all the kids I knew would go either take dancing lessons or, piano or guitar. Accordion was big, that's for sure. But I just pursued that, and then I got interested in tape recorders when I was around 10 years old. I didn't know anything about tape recorders, so we're talking like 1960, and went to a New Year's Eve party with my parents, with my dad's, basically his carpool buddies. He worked for Western Electric in it wasn't Northern Jersey. It was like in Weehawken, Elizabeth, right off the Pulaski Skyway, and the music was being played back on a tape recorder at the party, and I had never seen one before. And when I saw this, I was fascinated. And it wasn't the fellow's house that they were having the party that had a tape recorder. One of his buddies brought a tape recorder, and they were playing back the music, and I was fascinated with it. He took the reel off, put on a blank reel, and recorded my voice and played it back. And I'm like, whoa, it was a revelation. That's when I'm around 10, and like I said, my parents were very supportive. They were both working class parents, both mom and dad. My mom worked for Johnson & Johnson. My dad worked for Western Electric, as I mentioned. And they would always save up a couple bucks every year to get me a cool Christmas present. And, they got that piano for me when I was 7. So 10 years old, next year I wanted a tape recorder. And sure enough, under the Christmas tree was a little Japanese-made transistor tape recorder that only used batteries. There was no power supply, with 3-inch reels. And I loved that thing. And it just kind of went on from there. I got interested. In the following year, I got an electric mono tape recorder. And I was just, recording stuff around the house, recording myself playing the piano, recording conversations with hidden microphones, being a spy. It was fun. And one day, a friend of mine brought over, Huey Murray, brought over a fellow named Wayne DeRose. And Wayne DeRose had a Gretsch Country Gentleman. I had to be 12 years old, and he wanted me to record him. So I recorded him, and he supplied the tape, and I recorded him in my parents' basement. And the rest is kind of history. Every Christmas, then I got an acoustic guitar when I was inspired by Wayne's playing. And then following Christmas, I got an electric guitar. They're both Ks. I got a K electric guitar with a Univox amplifier. And then, freshman in high school, I started playing in bands, and I had a tape recorder. It just naturally worked its way into what I do now, what I've been doing for, almost 50 years at this point. I got into the studio in 72, so I'll have a 50th anniversary of being in studios in a couple of years. But I was the kid in high school in bands that would get the record, record it do the tape recorder, and then, go bit by bit and learn it, figure out the chords, write down the lyrics, and I would teach it to all the other guys in the band, which I suppose turned into my production skills.
Very interesting. Ed, thank you so much for doing this. This is Eric, real big fan of your career, and thanks for being on the show. I wanted to ask you, you began your career as a musician, which you're kind of alluding to right now in your previous answer, and an artist, and then 3 years later you transitioned into becoming a recording engineer. What prompted this change and transition for you?
Well, as I was saying, I was the guy in the band. I went through high school. After high school, I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City for a year, and then moved back to New Jersey, moved back to my parents after a series of incidents, including my apartment being robbed and getting mugged. I was living on the Lower East Side in 1968 and 69. It was a war zone. So I moved back to my parents. I had known some people. I had been in bands, and this fellow, Mike Bonagura, who really comes into play for some pivotal points in my career. Started a band, met these people in South Plainfield, New Jersey, close to the next town over. There's a North Plainfield, South Plainfield, and Plainfield, where Ritch was born. And started playing in bands. We got kind of popular, Jersey Shore, Long Island, upstate New York. And we got a couple opportunities to record. The first opportunity, somehow, we had a manager. His name was Barry Landers. He was kind of he was a radio guy and a promotional guy. He was working for WMCA Radio. He worked for the Yankees. And he got us somehow pulled off a deal. Oh, he also worked at a television station, WNJU, the PBS station in Newark, New Jersey. I forgot about that. And I think through there he met Richie Havens and Mark Roth. And he somehow finagled a deal with us, the band. We were called Men Working at the time, or we called Cartoon. We were called Cartoon. But then Swan Song, Jimmy Page produced a band called Cartoon. So there was already a band called Cartoon. So we changed the name to Men Working. And we got a demo deal with Richie Havens' Stormy Forest Records, and went to, ironically, Media Sound, where I did a shit ton of work with the Ramones and Genya Ravon, and worked on a couple TV shows there, did a bunch of stuff later on, and later on in the 70s through the 80s. And we went to Media Sound for 3 days. It was like November of 1970. And the engineer on this date, we had a producer. His name was Ted Barron. But Ted Barron didn't do anything but hang out and kind of look around and smoke a lot of weed. And Bob Margoloff, the producer engineer, Bob Margoloff, was the staff engineer at Media Sound. And I don't know if you know about Bob.
Bob's a very good friend of mine.
Oh, Bob is awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, he, as you well know, Bob and Malcolm Cecil,
right,
did all those Stevie Wonder records, and
right.
They had the Tonto's Expanding Headband, and Tonto was actually in Media Sound Studio A, and I got to see it. I have pictures of it, of those dates.
Right.
But Bob took over since the producer wasn't doing anything, and we needed some guidance. Bob took over, and as an engineer, but he was just like, try this, do this, let's try this. Why don't you put a slide guitar on? He turned into the producer while Ted Barron just smoked a lot of weed. And it was a great experience. And, little did I know that, in the following months that Stevie Wonder would end up knocking on Bob's door like 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning and saying, with Tonto's Expanding Headband record, and saying, did you do this record? I want to work with you, Bob.
Yes.
And there you go for the series of fantastic, starting with Talking Book and Intervisions.
Wow.
Those fantastic records, fantastic sounding, amazing, just great. Anyway, that was my first, being in the studio, and it was a 12-track Scully in there on 1-inch tape, very rare. It was 8-track going to 16-track. The 12-track in between there was a very unusual item that they had. I wish I had those multi-tracks. That would be fun to get a hold of those. They sound really good. I still kept copies of them. And, the sound is fantastic. I don't know what kind of console was in there at the time, but I was really inspired being at Media Sound and watching Bob. And we were in a couple other studios. Then we got a deal. We got a deal with when our manager, Barry Landers, went to work for the Yankees. A fellow named Nat Tarnopol had a box seat, and he was like the PR guy, and he schmoozed all these characters. And Nat Tarnopol's dad founded Brunswick Records.
Right.
And they had Brunswick. At the time, they had the Chi-Lites, Can You See Her? Big record on the charts in like 1971. Louis Armstrong was signed. I think even the Who were signed to Brunswick through Decca somehow. He mentioned to Nat Tarnopol, Barry mentioned to Nat Tarnopol that, hey, I got a band. And he said, oh, great, I'll sign them. Sight unseen, not a note heard. And packed us up. We packed up, the three of us. There was four of us in the band. The bass player had a kid and was working. He couldn't get off, so I ended up playing bass on this particular record. It was called Brandywine. Got a deal with Brunswick Records. Drove in one car with all our gear in it somehow across the country. Made it in like one day to Chicago. Stayed at a Holiday Inn and worked for 3 days doing the record. Like I don't even know how many songs there were. It's actually, if you, it's on, somebody told me it was on YouTube. The whole record is on YouTube, Brandywine, aged, AGED. But here's the kicker. The engineer that put that studio together and gave me great guidance and inspired me was Bruce Swedien.
Oh, wow.
The great.
He was still in Chicago. This cat is genius. He just passed in the past couple of months. Yeah. And fortunately, I was able to see him at an AES show several years ago and sat down. He remembered the session. I was able to thank him because, I asked him questions. He designed the studio. He had been in Chicago. At that point, he had recorded like Ella Fitzgerald and Count Basie, all the big bands, anybody that came through Chicago. Bruce had recorded. He was the man. Worked for Bill Putnam in the beginning. He's legendary. And I asked him questions, what was going on. It was a 16-track machine. It was an Ampex MM1000. He told me about equalization, et cetera, what the faders did. Because, I had a tape recorder and did demos in the basement. But I never had a recording console or preamps or good microphones. At that point, I had a Sony 630, which had the sound-on-sound capabilities, so I could overdub. But I just used the stock Sony microphones. Later on, I got a little Altec mixer. But Bruce was a big inspiration to me, and that was in the summer of 1971. And at the time, I had married a hometown girl. We had a kid. I was young. I was 21 years old. She was 18. Got married and ended up living in my parents' basement. And I was working. Oh, here's a good kicker. I was working for Ampeg, the amplifier company in Linden, New Jersey. And I got fired because I was always late because I was playing in the bands. I would get home at 4 a.m, get an hour's sleep, and I would always be late. So I just, they fired me. I got a telegram, the whole thing. And so I had to move into my parents' basement. And so fast forward to summer of 72, and I'm riding bicycles in my hometown, and I bump into, again, Michael Bonagura, who tells me that his dad, Big Mike Bonagura, who's an English professor at Alma White University in Zarephath, New Jersey, the music teacher there is professor there, the Juilliard-trained Tony Camello. And this guy, Tony Camello, is building a studio in his home in Somerville, New Jersey. And I just started hanging out there, collecting unemployment and learning by myself, basically.
It's interesting hearing you give the chronological time frame to this, because I believe in terms of your own career, within like a year or so of you doing this, you engineered your very first #1 hit record, which was Midnight Train to Georgia by Gladys Knight and the Pips. And I'm curious if did the success of that record specifically help your career at the time?
At the time, probably not at the time. I mean, it's kind of a legendary record.
Yeah.
And when people hear that I did that, they're like, "You did Midnight Train to Georgia? What, are you kidding me?" It was mixed in a basement. It was the first time I got on a plane to do the vocals, flew to Detroit to do vocals with Gladys and the guys. And it was exciting. Hey, I was in the studio, basically working with my friends, although I have to give my tip of the hat to Mike Bonagura for getting me into with Tony. And at the time I got in there, Tony Camello was partners with Tony Bon Jovi. Mm-hmm. They had Venture Sound together. And mysteriously, after around a month or two, Tony Bon Jovi was out of the picture. They had some kind of beef. I don't know. I never knew what it was. I haven't talked to Tony Bon Jovi in years, but probably like 25 years I haven't seen him. And Tony Camello passed away a couple of years ago. So I never did know what the beef was, but I fell in the engineer's chair. And, having that, just hearing the record on the radio. And, I honestly didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't trained. It was, I wasn't a T-boy. I wasn't an assistant.
Right.
I was just doing my thing. I did have one. I followed I went with Tony Bon Jovi into a session. He was on staff at Media Sound, ironically, at that time, as well as working with Tony Camello. And we went in, he brought me in to do a Kool and the Gang. He was working on Kool and the Gang. This was in the summer of 72. I don't remember what song it was. But at that time, there were no lockouts. It was, we're going to go in for, they booked in 3-hour sessions. So he had booked 2 3-hour sessions for the band. And we set up, he showed me about the headphones, how his headphones worked and the patch bay, and it was a 16-track. And we set up and did the track, and then we wanted to do vocals. And Tony said, "Hey, I'm going to go get a sandwich. You take over." And he threw me in the pool. And it was sink or swim, and I had the hiccups. And I remember everybody, all the guys in Kool and the Gang, all the boys trying to give me cures for the hiccups. It was, this sugar on the spoon, drink a glass of water upside down, all that stuff. But, it was sink or swim. Did the vocals. Okay, give me another track. I want to do some more vocals. Okay, how do I do this? So I went over to the patch bay and, okay, it just bing. It was kind of natural to me to figure it out. This went on for 2 hours. You did horns, you did percussion. And about after 2 hours of working on this by myself, Bob Walters, who later on with Tony and myself and Clear Mountain put together Power Station, Bob Walters, my first meeting with Bob Walters, he walks in, starts saying hi to everybody. "Hey, how are you? Cool. What's up? Blah, blah." He was very cordial, real businessman, tie and jacket. And he looks at me and goes, "Who are you? Where's Tony?" And as if on cue, the door opens and in walks Tony with the sandwiches. "Hey, Eddie, here's your sandwich." Bob's, "Well, who's Eddie? Who's this guy?" "Oh, Eddie, he's a great engineer. Don't worry, he's working with me. He's great, perfect." And Bob's like, "Okay, fine." It was scary, nervous, but that was my dip in the water. Never went back.
Wow.
But getting back to Midnight Train, I was living in a rented house in Somerville, New Jersey. It came up, and I was listening to WABC, and it came on the radio, and that was such a thrill for me to hear something I worked on, coming across and watching it climb the charts and went to #1. It was unbelievable. Yeah. It's just a matter of circumstance and, having a little bit of talent and a lot of luck is how I look at it. Right place, right time.
Wow.
I didn't plan anything. I still haven't planned anything.
Unbelievable. Let me ask you, in the November of 75, you went to the legendary Le Studio in Canada for 10 months, where you met and worked with the great Roy Thomas Baker, who had just finished producing Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. What insights and concepts, of recording and producing did you learn from him specifically?
Oh my God, Roy! He was just so funny and so personable. He was a laugh riot. He would do crazy things. Also, that was the first time I heard Bohemian Rhapsody. Wow. He brought a 1/4-inch tape in. As an engineer producer guy, we would we would carry around a 1/4-inch stereo copy. And the first thing he played to listen to the monitor speakers was the Rhapsody.
Wow.
I'm like, holy shit. I had not heard it.
Yeah, you must have been, hearing that for the first time, you must have been blown away.
It was unbelievable. It sounded so good. And, just the layering of the vocals and the panning and the drum sound. the great drum sound. It was just fantastic to hear that. But what I really learned from RTB was to bring in ambience into the sound. I had my own concept of what recording was, and separating instruments, putting blankets over amplifiers, putting drums at Camello's. So this is the only place I worked previous to the studio in Morin Heights. And, we used to isolate everything completely, no ambience, cover up the piano, don't let anything bleed through, put the drums in a drum booth. So the other engineer at the studio was Nick Blagona, the late and great, another big influence on me, Nick Blagona. And let me tell you another thing. It was a Trident A-series console, which is like the most incredible sounding console in the world. It just, nothing can top it. There are only 13 of them made.
Yep.
They're fantastic.
I've actually recorded on one Trident. Yeah, they're amazing.
Oh man, yeah. The console from the studio is at a place in Van Nuys somewhere. Yeah, and the model for the United Audio plugins was made from that console for their Trident EQ section. Pretty cool. Okay, so Nick and I set up the session. The gear gets there. It's the middle of winter. There's like 5 feet of snow on the ground. It was a beautiful place. There was windows, full windows out in the studio itself and in the control room. It was snowing. It was beautiful. I mean, the first day I got up there, I was doing a session and I sat there and cried. It was so beautiful. It was just amazing. So Nick and I set up the amplifiers and the drums and put the drums. They had a really closed off drum booth at the studio Morin Heights, which incidentally was designed by Nick and Andre Perry, the great Andre Perry. And we put the drums in the drum room. And in comes Roy the next day, and he's like, "Where are the drums? What are they doing in that little room over there? No, put them out. Come on, bring them out here. Bring them out. Take them, put them in this big room and get some of this lovely ambient sound." And that's exactly what he said.
Wow.
Get this lovely ambient sound. And I'm like, okay. And then, we put up room mics. I had never put up room mics before. And of course, after this, that's all, part of what I do is try to capture room mics. And even with guitars, he would, put a guitar amp and then mic it from down the hall.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I had never mic the back of an amplifier. He would try crazy things like that. He would, I remember he would put mics outside of the studio in the snow and, put the door open to get that kind of sound.
Wow.
It was just great. It was a big, and he was just the funniest guy and such a pleasure to work with. Easygoing, always joking, and funny as fuck, man. What a great guy. I saw him about, I was still living in Sherman Oaks, so it had to be in the 90s sometime.
Yeah, Roy lives in Arizona now. I had emailed him, I guess, what was it, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. I wanted to get him as a guest in my music business class, and because he comes into LA every so often, and we were trying to coordinate that, but we didn't get that together. But he was living there, and I know his ex-wife Barbara.
Yes,
as well. Barbara, lovely woman. Yeah, Barbara Baker.
I remember Barbara.
Yeah, exactly. So, after this period, you then moved to New York to work for your old pal, Tony Bongiovanni, at his new studio, the Power Station, which, an interesting factoid, is a studio that you named, by the way, and we'll get into that. But this was also a very seminal period in music, as well as your career, which went to a whole new level during this era. So this is a two-parter question for you. Talk to us about the artists that you worked with during that time, as well as what you remember about the music scene in New York in that era. Wow,
that's a lot. Well, first of all, it was ironic how I ran into Tony Bon Jovi. I moved up to Canada, basically hadn't seen him since that day at Media Sound doing the Kool and the Gang session.
Right.
And Alan Schwartzberg, the New York studio drummer, was somehow was a fan of my work, and we became friends. And there was a Geraldo Rivera, who we all know and love, even though he's on Fox these days. I'll keep the politics out. I'm sorry. Geraldo Rivera was working for ABC Television at the time, and he was a reporter, and he exposed it was a care place for
yes, an elderly care facility. It was national news. Yeah,
it was for kids. It was called Willowbrook.
Right.
And he went in there and did an expose for all these underdeveloped kids.
And he got the place shut down.
Yeah, he got the place shut down, but he had telethons to raise money for them. And Alan Schwarzberg was the musical director. I think Will Lee played bass. The Brecker Brothers were playing. It was Eric Gale was probably on guitar. All these New York cats. And Alan called me. He had my number up in Canada, and he said, "Hey, we'll fly you down to do the audio. Can you be the audio consultant for this telethon?" And I'm there. Hell yeah, it'll be fun. Put me in a hotel and fly on a plane, and basically stand behind a guy who's probably younger than I am right now, and to ask him to, can we have more top end on the snare, please? And because it was all union. I think it still is. It's all union stuff, so you can't touch anything in a television studio. Right. Although I think the SNL people, they got a little lenient with things and let people, get in there. So, and at this telethon, who's there but Tony Bon Jovi? "Hey, Eddie, me and Bob Walters, we're starting a new studio. How'd you like to be chief engineer?" I think he said the same thing to Clear Mountain. Although I never talked to Bob. I should ask Bob next time I see him. And I'm there. Well, yeah. And he said, "Okay, great. Just out of the blue, we're building a studio. I'm living in Canada. Well, come on, we'll pay for your expenses." Paid my moving expenses and gave me a salary, put me on salary, moved back. And like you said, in November of, was that 76, right?
Right.
Yeah, 76, November of 76. I'm asking you. I should know these things. My daughter was just born. And the first project was Ramones' Leave Home.
Wow.
That was the first thing I stepped in. And I couldn't there was some emergency with my daughter. I couldn't make the first day of tracking. So actually, Bob Clearmountain set up the session and recorded the first day. So the first time I ever heard the Ramones was the second day of the sessions, and it was playback.
Wow.
And I'm like, whoa, listen to that. What is this? It was wild. And it's funny. I'm doing all these, I put together these box sets with Rhino for all the Ramones records. And when I spoke with Bob about, because I got the track sheets and, it says Clear Mountain on it, BC. And I had forgotten that he had done the first day, and he didn't remember it at all. He said,
wow.
well, he did so many sessions back in the day,
right.
And he was on staff at Media Sound at the time. But yeah, we did started with Leave Home. I did some other stuff with Tony. I remember working with Miko on a thing called Disco Symphony, which later I think Donna Summer took the arrangement, and it was MacArthur Park. It was MacArthur Park. Right. And I did some jazz things. I don't even remember what they were. And yeah, Ramones, Talking Heads, like all in the frame of like 8 months. It was crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, man.
What was the inspiration for the name Power Station?
Well, it was, while we were looking for a building, and Tony was working full time. He was a hard worker. He had a label. He was signing artists. He was working at Media Sound. So Bob Walters would find the buildings, and we would go and look for different buildings. And when the Power Station building, it was a television studio. It was perfect. It was, on 53rd Street and 10th Avenue. Went and saw that, and it was before it was a television studio. It was actually a power station.
Interesting.
That's what it was. It was,
okay.
It was what's the company in New York? I don't remember. Con Edison. It was a Con Edison power station with big. They had, they had the, they didn't have them anymore. But it was one of those places where they had the big transformers in the basement, and it was just it was huge. There were no windows in the building. It was all sealed off, but it walked in there and it was like, oh, this is it, man. And, with the Roy Thomas Baker ambient expertise, I immediately thought, because it was you walk in there and what was going to be Studio A at Power Station, it was just this huge space. And, I talked to Tony, came by and says, "Oh yeah, we can put 2 floors in here." And I'm there, "No, we should make," and I suggested that we make a pyramid room, which, ultimately with Tony's field of acoustics, being very, he's an expert in that stuff. I think he went to MIT and worked out all the acoustics and came up with the dome design in Power Station Studio A. But we were knocking around names for the longest time, and I just said, "Why don't we call it Power Station? No but just Power Station."
Wow, amazing! You even inspired a band to take that name as well.
Yeah, it was funny. Yeah,
that's awesome. Ed, how intertwined is the role of the engineer and producer today versus back when you started?
Wow. Well, I'm still in the rock and roll world. I don't work on hip hop or rap, or I've never done any of that, or the pop stuff that's very popular today, which honestly, I have to say, I'm not very fond of. I'm a guitar guy. I have blinders on, and I don't know how these cats work, differently.
Right.
It's all pretty much.
In a digital space, yeah.
In a digital space, and all, with computers making the sounds and, changing, working with the vocals. I mean, it's so different. But, a lot of us cats back then, we all had something to say. And a lot of, like referring to Bobby and, Chris Lord-Alge, we were all musicians.
Right.
Harvey Goldberg, all these cats, they had bands at Media Sound. That would everywhere that I've worked, most of the people that went into engineer producers want to be rock stars. I wanted to be in a rock band, and back then there were a lot more per se producers than there that would be just producers and not engineering, but the metamorphosis to producer engineer happened to a lot of guys like me. We just were hands-on. Even working with an assistant that I did for years, I was still hands-on it. I just have an instinct for knowing when to punch in.
Right.
He would get levels and stuff, but I would tweak the stuff, and I've mixed on practically every project that I've ever worked on. So I kind of still do the same thing. I use Pro Tools as a tape, theoretically as a tape machine.
Right.
I don't quantize the stuff, like a lot of people do that. It's different like that. They make everything's perfect.
Perfect. Yeah. It's too perfect. Yeah.
It's too perfect for me. I like a little movement. I like I don't mind a vocal if it's a little off or out of tune, if it feels correct. Granted, if it's really nasty, I can get a little irked. But for me, it really hasn't changed all that much.
Okay.
I'm still basically doing the same thing that I did during, even though Tony was the producer with Tommy Early on the all the 2 Ramones records we did with Tony. Tommy and I, both of us engineered and produced those records. Tony wasn't around much, and Tony, I basically owe my career to Tony Bon Jovi's. From the Kool and the Gang session to starting a Power Station and getting me together with the Ramones. I admire Tony, and I owe him a lot. But he was a producer that wasn't around, didn't have a lot to say, and would let me and Tommy take over.
Interesting.
It's interesting listening to you, Ed, talk about that period, because you're speaking about those distinctions that existed. So I guess it makes me think the question for you then is, did you make a conscious decision to start producing records rather than continuing to just engineer at a certain point in your career? Or did it just naturally evolve that you left one field and went into another? Or did you continue to keep your fingers in both?
The fingers were in both all the time. And I swear, as mentioned, it goes back to being in garage bands in high school.
Okay.
Figuring out the songs, learning the songs, and then, basically, being the judge of, what the guys in the band would play. It's a matter of taste and opinion. It kind of comes naturally. Like I said, I never planned anything. I didn't plan anything. It just all fell into place. The tape recorder and guitar, and then I went, to 16 track and Ramones to, working with a bunch of, great artists over the years. And I'm basically doing the same thing.
Interesting.
And I just let it happen. There was no plan. I just let the universe guide me. And I love music. I love playing, and I love giving guidance and giving my opinion, and becoming the extra member, because I have worked with mostly with bands, and I become the extra member of the band and say what it's a collaboration.
So let me ask you then, obviously engineering prepared you for the role of a producer, but I think, you'd probably be the first to admit that there are distinctions in the role. And when you're producing a record, when you're the person in charge of producing that record, no matter who it's with, there are certain elements or certain things that, you have to do that perhaps somebody who's strictly an engineer on a project does not have to do. And I'm curious, were those things that you just naturally learned over time through doing a lot of sessions? Or were they things, you picked up along the way, or in terms of dealing with talent and dealing with the insecurities of it and coaxing performances out of people? I mean, sometimes engineers are involved in that. Sometimes they're not.
Or people who couldn't play their instruments that you had to,
work with. So how did that role in terms of your own career as a producer evolve?
It evolved naturally. It really did. I never thought about it. I just said what I had to say and jumped in and knew when to step back and let the artist do their thing. And I gave my opinion when I thought it was a necessary thing to do. And I really just want to bring the artist's vision to fruition. And I just suggest that I can judge. I can tell, what's going wrong, and I can tell what's going right. It's all instinctive.
Instinctive, yeah.
It really is. I didn't study anything. Haven't read any books about producing, or, I certainly haven't, gotten into the actual business of it. I've never been a business guy at all. As far as that, and
which is a perfect segue into our next question. And this is kind of like a cautionary tale for our audience, because our audience is comprised of musicians up and coming, brand new, that are just trying to break into the industry. And I would really like for you to speak about this. You had an incident with the band Rat when you moved to LA that kind of changed the way you handled your business. And I was wondering if you can speak to us about that incident. And what specific steps did you take?
Wow. Where did I talk about that? I don't even remember talking about that to anybody.
Well, it seemed like there was a poignant moment that happened in your career that this happened. And we're asking because we think it'll be beneficial to our audience. So if you wouldn't mind speaking about it, that would be fantastic.
You spoke about it on your site.
Okay. Paperwork.
Yes.
Paperwork is important. I co-produced that Rat.
The debut EP, I believe it was.
The EP, it was on Time Coast Records. Yep. I think later it was released on
Atlantic, the first album, right?
Yeah, I co-produced it with Liam Sternberg, and Liam Sternberg and I co-produced a few projects, Rat being one of them. And Liam went on to great fame with songwriting, writing Walk Like an Egyptian for the Bangles.
For the Bangles, yeah. And
it was a huge monster hit for him. So he's, last I heard, he was in the south of France somewhere. Anyway, a fellow, their manager, promised us and promised Liam. Liam was, because I honestly, if there's anything I can look back on and say, well, I should have done this, it was, I should have had a better handle on my business affairs, which I didn't really care about. And honestly, I still run with blinders, and I'm very cautious, but I don't dive into business affairs very much. Liam was the business affairs half of that partnership, and the manager of Rat told Liam and myself that you will be getting points on the record, and that if they get a deal with this record, that we will produce the album. That never happened. and it was never in writing.
Right.
And, I didn't even, at that point, well, I guess I didn't know. I have to go back a little bit to elaborate on this story a little bit. I didn't know anything about points for producers, but I was having a conversation with the late, great Susan Planer, who was, after Bob Walters left management at Media Sound, Susan Planer came in. And we started chatting, and she said, aren't you getting points for producing Ramones? And I said, well, I don't know, what are points? I had no idea, mid-20s. I didn't know. I really didn't. And she said, well, you should be getting points, and hooked me up with an attorney who from then on, for a few years, I don't even remember the guy who it was, but I went with him and met with the business affairs, Jonathan Brett at Sire Records, and managed to squeeze points out for both starting with It's Alive, the third Ramones record that I did, and then with Road to Ruin. And, I had to sign a contract. And that was before the rat incident, but I put everything in my partner Liam's hands and thought it was taken care of when it wasn't. So always, youngsters out there, all you kids, get it on paper, man. Get it on paper. If somebody says, yeah, we're going to give you points on this, or, you're going to be the producer. I was told I was a producer on a couple records, a co-producer, and I came back as engineer. So, get it, just even if it's a deal memo, one sheet paper. If you feel that strongly that you are producing, ask for it. It doesn't hurt to ask. Asking is a good thing. They can only say no. And if they say no, you can walk away or continue on.
Hey Insiders, we hope that you're enjoying our featured interview. Before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. So hey Ritch, tell me a little bit about the Music Business Registry.
Well, what we are, Music Business Registry is the leading contact directory. We publish all of the most current, accurate, and up-to-date contact information for the music industry. We do directories for A&R. We do directories for music publishers. We do directories for film and television music. We do directories of artist managers, and we do directories of music attorneys. And we also sell other publications too, like the Indie Bible Series, the YouTube Bible Series, the Indie Spotify Bible Series, and other things as well. That's what we're about.
So if I wanted to find out, let's say, the music supervisor for American Horror Story, I can kind of go into the Film and TV monthly and find the information that I need there?
Well, we don't list specific shows. What we do list is if you know who the music supervisor is, and you can find that out on IMDb, then you can find their contact information. And we have that in our Film and Television Music Monthly. Absolutely, yes.
That's great. And I hear that we have a discount right now. If you go to musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your first order.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, we offer that to all of the MUBUTV insiders.
So insiders, check out musicregistry.com and use MUBUTV10 as your coupon code.
Ed, over the years, and it's indicative in this conversation, you have worked with a lot of great producers in your time and in your career. Talk to us about the specific qualities that you feel make for a great producer.
That's Rich. That's a tough question. I've honestly never thought about that. I just kind of glide along with go along with the flow. You have to trust your I think trusting your instinct, and I can only speak for myself. Trust your instinct and believe in yourself as far as what you have to say about things. It's instinctive to me. I've said that several times. Yeah. I don't plan anything. I never planned anything. I put the same effort into everything you do. Whether if it's like, kids down the street in a garage that you're bringing a 2-track over to, you're bringing your MacBook over to with a mixer, or you're in a recording studio, working with Pro Tools, with an artist who, has already had a couple records out and has become popular, and you get in that room with them and just treat everything the same, treat everything as gold, because we're all so lucky. I consider myself incredibly lucky to, have done this for like I said, almost going on 50 years at this point.
Wow.
And somehow I've managed to hang in there. And I just think it's because I just do what I do. I believe in myself, believe in yourself, and put as much effort into a little shit project as you would if you were working with the Rolling Stones.
Absolutely. Which is a perfect segue. Rolling Stones is like you're reading our mind.
Look at me.
You worked on Mick Jagger's second solo album, Primitive Cool. And during this time, he found a band called Living Colour that he was making demos with while mixing the album. How did you come to produce their debut album, Vivid, which is a masterpiece in my opinion?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love those guys. I still speak with them and work with them on occasion.
Yeah.
Vernon's a very good friend. We chat every, monthly, pretty much. And, getting the Jagger thing was a real blessing. It was, I had done Dave Jordan has a lot to do with two projects, pivotal projects that I worked on. The great producer, Dave Jordan, good friend.
Amazing, Jane's Addiction, everything.
Yeah. Great stuff. Yeah. Alice in Chains.
Alice in Chains, yep.
Yep. Great stuff. Great guy. And I met Dave on my first jaunt to Los Angeles between 81 and 83 at El Dorado Studios. Met him there with the owner, Gary Gunton. So Dave and I were buds. I was living in Los Angeles on the first jaunt, and Peter Wolf had left the J. Giles Band. And Dave was booked on another project. And he calls me up and says, "Hey, I'm suggesting that you work with Pete Wolf on his solo record. He's going to give you a call." Cool, great. So that all worked out. I flew out to Boston, hung out with Pete. We got along like gangbusters, and I got hired for the gig. That was a real pivotal moment. I actually left LA at that time. Went to Boston. It was another November kind of thing. It was cold. We stayed in Boston. We were in Boston like November, December, part of January, and then Pete and I had dinner. He wanted somebody else to mix the record. He was talking about somebody else mixing the record, and I convinced him that hey, give me a shot. And we ended up going to Right Track Studios in New York to mix the record, and Pete knew everybody. I mean, when we were in Boston, I met all the guys in the cars. I have some funny stories, but I have to tell you one little quick story about working with Pete. And okay, so this is when the Cars are doing Heartbeat City with
Mutt Lange.
With Mutt Lange. And so they're working on it, and all the guys would come. They had a little clubhouse. They would go down their basement clubhouse, and Elliot, and I became really good friends with Elliot. I'm still friends with Elliot. He's in a band called Empty Hearts that I work with. And so they're down there smoking their weed and stuff. And then Rick comes in one day and says, "Hey, I'm leaving. Well, I'm going to England to mix the record with Mutt." Okay, cool. See you. So, he comes back a couple weeks later, and he has this downtrodden look on his face. And they're like, "Oh, what, Rick, how'd the mixing go, man?" "Oh, Mutt was working on a kick drum sound for 2 weeks."
Right. Yes.
I was just waiting for the Mutt Lange.
But yes. Yeah. I've heard those stories. Legendary stories. Yeah. Def Leppard tells many of those stories. They said, the 9-week album project turned into 9.5 months.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. But the results that he gets in the records are astonishing.
You cannot argue with it. They sound amazing.
Amazing. But he does take an exorbitant amount of time to achieve that.
Yeah, Elliot said that, how they does all those eighth notes to the cars, dunk, 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 dunk.
Yep.
He said he would do one bar and then, keep doing it over and over again until it was perfect. And then it would spend days doing a guitar part.
Exactly.
Just dunk, 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 dunk. Again, dunk, 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 dunk. Great. Oh boy. Great stuff. Anyway, so, all sorts of people came by. I met, that's when I met, the guys in Aerosmith came by, and Carly Simon dropped in, and then we went to New York, and Dylan's dropping in, and Bowie's dropping in, and Jagger's is dropping in. So I met Jagger he did some backing vocals on Pete's record on one of the songs, and Dave Jordan got me that gig. So a couple years later, or a year later, whenever I don't even remember the years. I think it was, let's see, I finished that Wolf record in 84, so I think it was like 85 or 86. I get another call from Dave Jordan because he had worked with the Stones on Dirty Work that Steve Lillywhite produced.
Right.
He engineered it. And he says, hey, Jagger's doing a solo record. He's down in Barbados. He wants me to do vocals for 2 weeks. I can't do it. I'm working on something here in Los Angeles. He's going to call you. Okay. Same thing with Wolf. Jagger gives me a call. I was nervous. Of course, anytime I'm a fanboy, so I get so nervous meeting people.
Right.
I was
particularly
speechless.
your heroes.
Yeah. Dylan came in at the Pete Wolf sessions. I'm like, oh my God, it's Bob Dylan. He's talking to me. Amazing. So Jagger calls me and he says, yeah, we're going to do some vocals, and Jeff Beck is going to be down there doing some guitars, and he left his Rat pedal. Can you go to Manny's and pick up a Rat pedal? I still have it, but I'm like, oh my God, Jeff Beck. I love out of all Hendrix.
Right.
And Jeff Beck are like my fucking heroes. They're my guitar gods. Hendrix was a huge inspiration to me during my late teenage years. And then when Beck was in the Yardbirds and all that, the sounds he got and the stretching of the strings, just amazing. So he's my hero. And Page, of course. So I go down to Barbados, fly down. Mick flies me down, and went to Eddie Grant's studio. Eddie Grant's studio is a plantation that his grandfather was a slave on.
Wow.
He bought the plantation after the success of Electric Avenue and other songwriting and others, et cetera, et cetera. And he's a native Barbados cat. Cool studio, SSL, full on live-in facilities, kitchen, cook, the works. I beat Jeff Beck at Trivia Pursuit. Outstanding moment of my life. Anyway, so we're down there, and what happens? Jerry Hall gets busted for weed. Wow. A package of weed is shipped to her at the post office, and she gets busted, goes to jail. They bail her out, and we had to stay there. Instead of 2 weeks, it turned into 2 months. So we're down there, replaced all the drums with Simon Phillips. Doug Wimbish comes down, plays bass on the whole record, doing vocals every day. It was kind of disorganized. It was done in 3 different places. And so there was different sets of tones you had to align to, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so Mick says, we're going to continue in New York. I want you to finish the record with me. Okay. So we're finishing it. And Ronnie, another great engineer producer, Ron St. Germain, was friends with Vernon, and somehow talked Mick into doing demos. Ron engineered it, and they went down to CB's. Jeff Beck and Mick went down to CBGB's to see Live in Color. Wow. And comes back and Mick's like, I saw this fantastic band. I didn't go. Beck was there, and it was, and Mick wanted to do demos somehow, and Ronnie engineered the demos. We're in Studio A mixing the record. We had Keith Diamond producing. We also had Dave Stewart, Eurythmics, producing some tracks, and Mick producing some tracks. So I was in there with on my own pretty much mixing, and then Mick would come over and check out the mix and give his suggestions and comments, and I would continue. And he'd go back into Studio B with Ronnie, and they did 2 songs. And and they were great. And I got on really great with Vernon and Muzz and, Will and Corey, great guys who were hanging out in the lounge and, bullshitting, playing video games. Vernon actually played a little bit on Mick's record on one of the songs. I don't remember which one. It was a little bit. And so a couple months go by. And I'm doing a lot of work at Right Track. It was kind of my home base. It was on 48th Street, where on Music, what used to be Music Row, in between Broadway and 6th Avenue. There, it was just all the music stores. Sam Ash was there, Manny's was there. We Buy Guitars, all these great stores. And you always used to see people coming by. There would be cats on the street selling amplifiers and guitars. I got this great Ampeg Jet from this guy you used to call the Blues Man. I'm the Blues Man. I got some stuff for you to buy. And I bought this great, and it was cheap. I got it for like $60. I still have it. It's a great little amp. Anyway, I'm walking out of Right Track, and who do I bump into but Vernon Reid? Wow. And he's there, dude, how are you? Haven't seen you. Hey, we've been talking to people. We got signed to Epic Records. We got a deal. We're talking to producers. They're bringing up all these, and he's talking. Yeah, we're talking about Phil Ramone and one of the cats who produced Steely Dan.
Gary Katz.
Yeah, I think it was Cats, maybe Cats. The immortal Roger
Nichols. Yeah.
Yeah, some of those Cats, but like, A-list Cats, And he said, and your name came up. I'm there, really? Oh, that's cool. And he says, let's get together and chat. Let's go. And I said, okay. So I was living on 78th Street, and I said, well, why don't you come by this week sometime? I'll cook up some fish on the grill, my grill. Yeah, I had like a hibachi on a 4x4 balcony on the end it was a nice apartment. It was a floor through on 78th Street, right at a dead end at the Museum of Natural History. It was a great spot. But I had a little hibachi, and I knew Vernon was a pescatarian, and he came by. I said, okay, it was like a Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday. I said, come by on Thursday. We'll cook up some fish and we'll chat. We'll listen to some stuff and hang out a little bit. Cool. So that day, that Thursday, this was 86, 87. So it was, I was replacing all my vinyl with CDs. Now I'm going back and listening to all my vinyl again, of course. But, I was going to Tower Records. Tower Records opened up a store at like 62nd and Broadway, somewhere around there. And I walked down there in the morning. I was going to stop at Fairway and pick up some food for dinner. And while I was down there, I went to picked up a couple CDs. And I'm walking back, and on my way back, I'm a collector of sorts. I go to garage sales. I stop when people are selling shit on the street. And this cat, this downtrodden, fellow, selling his stuff, had all these R&B records, and I'm looking through the records. And I flip through and I find this record called Skull Snaps. Now, I did a record with these. That was the first thing I ever did. I mean, I did stuff previous to Skull Snaps, but that was the first record that I had released. Wow. That was released with my, with engineering credit. And mind you, again, I had no idea, what I was doing. My whole life is a damn experiment, seriously. So I said, oh, my God, because I did not have a copy of the record. I had the single, which was called It's a New Day, which incidentally has been sampled on like over 500 hip hop songs, the drum break in it, the intro. And I pick it up. I asked him how much he wants. He wanted $1 for it. I had a 20. I gave him a 20. I said, you don't know what this means to me. I gave him $20. I walked back. I tell my wife at the time, Francine, said, you're not going to believe what I just found on the street in New York City. I found the first record I ever did that I never had a copy of, the Skull Snaps. Wow. Okay, so boom. Okay, so Vernon comes by. We're chatting. We're talking. We have dinner. And I tell Vernon the story that I did this record. And Vernon looks at me and says, you did the Skull Snaps record? I learned how to play guitar by listening to that record.
Oh, my God.
And just started hugging me. And that's how
That's how you sealed the deal.
I sealed the deal with the Skull Snaps record. Yeah, wow. Man. It's true.
It's like fate. Fate, it was like meant to be.
It was, again, the serendipity working in your favor, the universe talking to you.
That's a story of my life, man. It's one thing after another like that.
Wow.
It's quite amazing, quite remarkable, because I've never pursued this career.
It pursued you. Yeah. And Vernon is a really cool guy. He actually caught one of the sets of my band, and he came up to me after. This is during NAMM, and he was just very sweet and just a legendary. My God, what an incredible band. Wow,
what band are you? Do I know the band?
No, you wouldn't know the band, but it was just during a NAMM event that we had played, and I was just so blown away because I'm a huge fan of Living Colour, and one of the reasons why we had you on the show was because I wanted to have you on the show because of that record, because awesome. Just Open Letter to a Landlord, those songs, my God, are just unreal.
Fantastic. It fell in my lap, seriously. Wow. I mean, how can you fuck that up? Seriously.
Yeah.
Wow. And it was such a huge success and enormously, it was a big breakthrough too,
Yes.
Having that. I mean, a black rock band. I mean,
right.
A credible black rock band, it probably hadn't happened since Hendrix. It was, extraordinary.
Yeah, man.
And there were hit singles as well. You did. And I want to ask you, Ed, you then went on to produce the Jeff Healey band that were signed to my old alma mater, which was Arista Records, as well as the Smithereens. And I'm curious, how did those projects come to you?
They came to me. They just came to me.
Okay.
I guess I have some kind of reputation. They tracked me down. And they contacted me somehow. I don't even know. I really don't even know. I can say the Smithereens, Mark Freed, who was then working at BMI and now has Spirit Music, introduced me. He thought I would be good. We became friends. And he was a New Yorker, and he did hook me up with the Smithereens.
Okay.
A couple of years previous to me doing Smithereens 11, they were about to go into the studio with Don Dixon to do Green Thoughts. And we went to Mama Leone's of all places, went to Mama Leone's. And that was the last time I was at Mama Leone's, famous Italian restaurant in New York.
Wow.
Been there for like forever. And he introduced us. So that's how that happened. And you know how the Living Color thing happened. And it's all just metamorphosis. It's crazy.
It's unreal.
It's almost spiritual in a way.
Yeah.
It just, things kind of happen, it's all coincidence. It's all connections. And I'll say it again. I didn't pursue this.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Let me ask you, how important are a producer's people skills in the studio when working with artists? And what kind of producer are you? This is a follow-up. What kind of producer are you in the studio?
I want to bring the artist vision to fruition through whatever means necessary. And I give my opinion and, work with the artist to see what they want. I mean, it's their record. It's not my record. I don't have I don't demand stuff. I'm a collaborator. I'm a pal. I'm a friend. I'm a girlfriend. I'm a boyfriend. I'm a, mom and dad. People confide. People confide in me. I don't know what it is, but people just will take me aside and tell me their problems. It happens it still happens to this day. I get phone calls from people, wanting to talk about shit.
Wow.
Yeah. And, I have limited musical ability, honestly. I'm not a proficient player. I can knock off some guitar chords and some piano stuff, even play the drums a little bit, but I'm not proficient. I'm not like a, big time music cat. I'm just a vibe guy, man.
Interesting. Yeah.
Let me ask you then, Eddie, on that note, when you're considering producing an act, I'm curious, and I think our audience would be curious too, based on your experiences, what specific qualities beyond the songs are you looking at to determine whether you take the job or not? Because I have to assume, and you don't have to name names, I assume in your career there have been situations where they've come to you and said, Ed, we want you, and for whatever reason, and you don't have to get into it, but for whatever reason, you don't take the job. And it may even be something that you really liked. So I always think it's insightful to get from producers like yourself, what are those non-musical, non-creative qualities that you look for in making your decision as to whether to work with somebody or not?
Well, I'm a people person, and okay. I have good sense about when I meet somebody if we're going to get along or not.
That's okay. Great. All right.
Yeah. I can immediately tell. Just looking, I get along with Eric. I've never met Eric before. We're getting
I definitely feel the vibe there. You might be producing our next record. Who knows?
Cool. Yeah. It's just, it's the feeling of camaraderie, which is something I'd like to say that I miss tremendously these days, the camaraderie. And not just because of the plague, COVID, being here alone all the time and working on my own, not seeing anybody. But this has now been going on for around 20 years. Working at home. I first started working at home 20 years ago, and I just, haven't had that project that's going to take. Back then, you'd get together with a band or an artist and you'd be togetere for a few months,
right?
Be hanging out. They're your family. And I really miss that. I miss the family. I miss the camaraderie. Those are great times, being in the studio, just making music, going out to dinner, having your meals together. It was a great time back then. And it's kind of gone by the wayside. Everybody's doing it by themselves at home now.
Yeah.
And that's been happening for quite some time.
Yeah. And it kind of leads me to the next question. You kind of answered that partly in your previous answer just now, but what are your favorite aspects of the record making process? Obviously that's one of them, the camaraderie, but I'm wondering what other aspects of it do you enjoy?
just seeing it all come together, starting from listening to the demo and then working in a rehearsal. The whole process it's fascinating to me. It's just really, an extension of my teenage years. It's, me, the kid, putting, paperback Rider on a tape and listening to it and figuring it out. And then, teaching it to my cover band in high school. And now it's, you get a demo and you listen to the demo and you say, well, we can, do a little bit of the arranging, we'll suggest it. The whole process to me is I still love the process. And I've been doing it a long time. I'm not sick of it. I still love it. I love, working on the arrangements with the band. I love recording. I love getting the sounds. I like to get sounds quick. I'm not mutt, that's for sure. I like to get it going quick, get takes. And, these days it's very great. I always did vocal comps, even on tape, which took forever. Yeah. But with Pro Tools now, you just, and I let the artists do their thing. I don't give much guidance. If certainly something's really off kilter, I will say something. Right. But I've always let the artist do what they do. That's very important. Just let them. Let it flow. Let them blossom. Let the artist blossom.
And then you weave it in the comp. Yeah.
Yeah, in the comp, and I'll do 8-10 takes of a vocal, and then I'll spend a day, comping that. And in Pro Tools, it's so easy. Yeah. No rewinding. Something that I've said over the years since getting into the box and working in Pro Tools is, well, man, I probably spent 2 or 3 years of my entire life rewinding, fast forwarding, and changing reels.
Right. Cutting tape, splicing it.
Oh my God, cutting tape. Yeah, I was a champ, and I still do that. I still, do multiple takes of the track, and then get the best bits. I have a real knack for getting that done. Not to get off subject, but it's talking about cutting tape and actually editing. Cutting tape saved my life once, and my assistant Paul Hamingson. We were in England, and we were due to come home. I think it was '88. Due to fly home on, I think it was the 22nd of December. I was working with a band. It was for Virgin, and they were called the Muscle Shoal, named after the famous studio down there. And where is Muscle Shoals? Alabama?
Alabama.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. And they were a real cool band. They sounded sort of like Squeeze. They're really great guys, really fun. We cut the tracks at Rockfield in Wales. Really great studio where I had done some work with the Searchers, with late great Pat Moran. Really great place. We were tracking there, then we moved somewhere else. Anyway, so after the first day of tracking, we went out. Kingsley, the owner of the studio, brought us to a great restaurant in Monmouth, and the drummer got shit-pissed, drunk out of his brain in the gutter, drunk, really out of control. And we had to pick him up, seriously, picked him up out of the gutter on the way back to the studio to get him in the car. And the next day, he couldn't play. He just, we're playing with a click track. He couldn't play. And I had to we were only there for like 3 days to do tracking. And then we were moving to Rupert Hines' studio, which is called Comfort's Place, another residential studio. Yeah. And I have my own splicing block that I was inspired. Roy Thomas Baker had his own splicing block in his own in a little briefcase. So I copied Roy, bought my own splicing block after that because he did a lot of editing as well. And so I spent, when we got to Comfort's Place, I forgot my splicing block. They only had one machine, and I had like 9 takes of this song, and I had to splice them together. So I had to notate which takes were the best. And we had 2 songs that I had to put together, splice. And one of the songs I was actually pulling drum fills from one song and putting it into another song. It was nuts. Wow. There were I remember there being 37 edits in the song. And this added a day to our schedule. And we were trying to get home on that 22nd day, and we were working. We had our bags packed. Paul Hamingson and myself had our bags packed, my assistant, and we were ready to go. We had bags packed, want to go to the airport, see if we get done. It was a 10 o'clock flight out of Heathrow, and we didn't finish. And we just kept going. And I told my wife at the time, Francine, that we're trying to get on the plane. I don't know if we're going to make it. And I get a call from her around midnight, freaking out. What's going on? She was crying. She said, "Oh God, you're still there." And it just happens that this flight that we were supposed to go on was Pan Am 103.
Oh my God.
And because of that drunk drummer and splicing for an extra day. We didn't get on the plane. Boom.
Oh my God. Wow. The Lockerbie, Flight 103 over Scotland.
Yeah, man. True story.
Unbelievable. Wow.
It still sends chills down my spine.
Yeah. I just saw a documentary about that the other day on television. That's crazy. Yeah.
I want to ask you, Ed, now that we're talking about production and about editing and different aspects of the record making process, for you as a producer, how important is pre-production to you before you start a record?
Big time.
Big time? Okay.
Yeah. I always, because I have ideas. I have ideas about arrangements. I have ideas about possibly some chord changes, possibly some lyric changes. But most of all, in pre-production, it's working. Some drummers are not inspired. Some drummers are. Some drummers aren't. And I'll change up. Cut. Just for example, cut down the intro. Cut the first chorus in half. Don't go to the first chorus there. Go to a little turnaround and then, give it a tease of what's going to be a chorus. And then, I'll come up with ideas, just friendly ideas that, I'll suggest. There are always suggestions to the band, and work with drum parts on kick drum patterns and fills and what you should do, what you should try. So pre-production is super important, and just tightening up the band. These days, I do it a little differently. When we had those months to work on records, say for Living Colour and Smithereens, Healey, we all had 2 weeks of pre-production previous to going into the studio. Wow. Tightening up things. Vernon always talks about the change I made on Cult of Personality. Which was originally that Cult of Personality came up like 3 times during the verse. And I changed it around so that it happened only at the end of the verse.
Right.
It was very different. Vernon remembers better than I, and he always brings that up. But I did change. It was a big change we did in that. So pre-production is super important. Yes, and it's a get along period too. You meet with the artists and you hang out. You go to dinner, or whatever, have a couple drinks or coffee, and the pre-production is where you really see, hey man, is this gonna really work? And fortunately, it's worked on 99% of the records that I've worked on.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's all about the arrangement and suggestions, and it's all about. It's cooperative. It's collaboration, because when you're doing that, the artist comes up with ideas as well. So things get a little better, get a little different, and it tightens up stuff.
Yeah, you're iterating as you go. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Ed, an interesting observation that I heard many producers make about modern recording technology is that with analog, you had to make choices. And today with digital, you have way too many options. Do you agree?
Yeah, totally. As a matter of fact, I got a session in a couple months ago for basically pretty much a 3-piece punk band to mix 391 tracks.
Oh my God!
Holy shit!
How do you even Jesus
for a punk band? Wow.
Well, it was because of not making decisions.
Exactly, because they could. Yeah.
The bass was there, but there were like dozens of guitar tracks doing different things, and it's not I'm not producing this. It was just a mix. And so, I had a little bit of a time about it, but I just had to deduct. I was deducting things. It was a lot of unnecessary stuff on there. There's like 50 MIDI keyboard tracks for what? When you can use one of those tracks. It was kind of insane. Wow. So, and that's just a good example of people, not making decisions. You have to make decisions. I came up in making decisions. So I still work that way. Yeah. I make immediate decisions. I know when something's right, and I don't leave anything to chance. Just get it right. Get it right the first time. Put it down. I'm old school, man. Yeah. I'm all about the feel.
For sure.
And I do. I do the comps with drums, and I do say guitar solos and vocals, backing vocals. I'll concentrate and just get it right. And I do the old Roy Thomas Baker thing. I still stack different vocals. Oh, and while I was at the studio, I also was witness to the Bee Gees working on "Children of the World," which a lot of the stuff ended up on the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
Yeah, that's a seminal album of theirs. With Arif Mardin. Was he?
No,
did he do that record, "Children of the World"?
No,
or he did the follow-up?
Yeah, no, that was Carl Richardson.
And Albie Galutin. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and watching them do backing vocals was, they did the 3-part backing vocals, but they would all 3 of them would go out there and do their one part, a unison part, and then they would double that, then they would triple that, they would bounce that down, then they would go do the second one. Amazing. And so I, and Baker obviously did the same thing with Queen. So that's some great tips that I got back in the mid '70s with doing that, and I'll still work like that. I must admit, once in a while I do fly if I get a great backing vocal on one chorus. And we're in working with a click track. I will admit that I do fly them into the second chorus as well.
Ed, let me ask you. In terms of talking about choices, like we've been doing, what's your criteria in choosing recording studios to work with, and did it depend on the type of music that you're working with in terms of making those choices?
Oh wow. You can make a great record anywhere.
Okay.
You can make a great record in a basement, which people are doing these days, I'm sure. But let's go back and one of my favorite sounding records that I've ever done is the Talking Heads 77, and that was done in a little tiny studio. It was a commercial studio. They did jingles there. It was a jingle room. It was a studio that Tony Bon Jovi found. We did the Ramones in there.
Wow.
It was a really, 16-track, tiny little, great sounding console, Roger Mayer console, and a seriously tiny dead room, like, carpeting and foam baffles, and but it's the songs. You got a good song. How can you fuck up a good song? You can record it anywhere, and I certainly enjoyed working in big rooms. That was my forte. After working with Roy, went to Sundrag in that little room, but like a lot of the stuff, the next stuff we were doing at Media Sound, and I even used Media Sound, the room. It was a church, so like 60-foot ceilings. It was amazing sounding room.
Oh yeah.
And I started throwing room mics up there. Did Rocket to Russia track there, tracked Road to Ruin there, and even during working with the Heads on 77. Chris, the drummer, wanted the drums to sound a little bigger, and what we did, it was his idea. We sent from Ascend, we took the snare drum and the kick drum and sent it out to the big room at Media Sound, and actually we didn't have any tracks to record it on. So as we mixed it, it was going down, the ambient sound coming back into the console. Wow. Was used that way. Instead of reverb, we used the room.
Interesting.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, man. So, but going, I do like big rooms.
Yeah.
A&M Studio A.
Yeah.
It's a huge, fantastic sounding room. Did a lot of work in there. The Studio Moore, nice big room. Where else? Right Track had a great, great old big room. Yeah, Power Station, of course.
Studio A.
Course. Yeah.
And yet, like what you were saying about, one of your favorite records that you've ever done was Talking at 77, which was done in a very plain, small room, but yet it's still your favorite. Yeah, exactly. So it's about the material.
Yeah, it's a cool sounding record. Not to pat myself on the back, but it does sound cool. Yeah. It really brings across the personality of the band that they were at that particular time.
Yeah.
And yeah, man.
Ed, let me ask you, was the transition from analog recording to digital a challenging one for you to make? And this is a two-parter. Are there specific times of the day that you prefer to work?
Let's go with the time. Yeah, I'm an afternoon night guy.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not a morning guy at all. This is early for me. Still early, even though it's 12:30 here.
Right.
Yeah, usually I'll start around 1 or 2 o'clock, and it's always been like that. And then back in the day when we were making those records, it'd be getting in there at 1 and finishing at 1 or 2, 3 in the morning.
Right.
And I don't go quite that late anymore, but it's afternoon, early evening.
Right.
Then I'll have dinner and chill. And I don't work the long hours. I work probably 5 or 6 hours a day these days.
Okay.
Somewhere around there. But what was the
transition from analog recording to digital? Was that challenging for you to make?
It was not. It actually refreshed my excitement about recording again. And I started off when I was living in Sherman Oaks in a back room with a little Pro Tools system. It was probably like version 5 or 6 or something, and a Mac, and a couple of little preamps that I had. And
are you amazed by all those rack-mountable racks that have gone digital? I mean, that must be something that was, I'm sure you still like obviously working on the actual physical, but that's got to blow your mind that they've duplicated these things.
Yeah, you're talking about the plugins.
The plugins, yeah.
Yeah. No, some of them, they're great. I especially the United Audio plugins, and the Stephen Slate stuff is really great as well. And I did like at the NAMM show of quite a few years ago when the UA came out with that their plugin series. They A/B'd the actual original to the plugin, and honestly. I couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah. I just asked because you come from that era where all of these things were being used. So I got to imagine that's got to be mind blowing to see these things being duplicated in a digital environment.
It's great. And, recalls are amazing because, of course, been working long distance, for years now. And especially during COVID, I'm sending, files to, the Hoodoo Gurus in Australia. And, I'm working on something else. I'm working on the Dictators and working on whoever the hell. Where's a list? I have a list. The Tearaways, the Hoodoos, the Ramones. I've been working on the Ramones box sets.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All the 40th anniversary box sets. Right now, it's the Phil Spector produced End of the Century box set that I'm working on.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, with working, I strictly work in the box. I mean, I have a bunch of outboard gear that I use when I'm recording. Here at the house is a recording studio. I have the drums permanently set up.
I'm seeing all the rack-mountable stuff you got behind you. And
I got a few things over here. Yeah, my record collection.
Yeah.
Awesome. I keep my records in here. I do a vinyl show called Talking Wax every Saturday night, and it's a lot of fun.
Oh, nice.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Okay, we'll be sure to mention that in the show notes. In the show notes for it. Let me ask you, Ed, are there any books or videos that you have come across in your time, professionally speaking, that you think are really things that are worth watching regarding record making or record producing, books or videos or?
There's a series of the making of records. Oh,
yes, the classic album series.
Yeah, the classic album series.
Yes.
They're great. I love watching them.
I love those. I have several of those here.
Yeah, I have a bunch as well.
They're unbelievable. And the other one that's good, but it's not videos, it's books on them, is the 33 1/3 series, which covered the making of all of these classic albums, but they're books about it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I do know of those. I might even I think I have one for Disraeli Gears.
Yes. Yeah. Disraeli Gears and so many on that classic album series, which is, really extraordinary. I mean, there's the way, and what I find that's so interesting about those is that each one of them is not the same. Sometimes you get to hear the tracks, sometimes you don't. Sometimes, like the Steely Dan one, they reproduced, the original musicians and reproduced the tracks in the video itself when they did Asia. I mean, Stevie Wonder did Songs in the Key of Life in that way, where he brought together
the thing that was
people
amazing.
Back together. Yeah, rather than looking at the original track. So they're all different. They're really all different. The Who's Next one is amazing.
Yeah, it's great. I have that one.
That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back again to the question about digital versus analog, because I was getting to a point with talking about the different people. Sure. With recalls, I can work on several projects at a time. If I was working, say, mixing in the mix room at A&M, you're patching in all that stuff. It's all outboard gear. You write it down. Yeah, and if you're going to do a recall, it's going to take you 3 hours to get everything back, and it never really comes back the same. You have to A/B it, listen to it, tweak things. I work strictly in the box. So if I'm working with different artists, I can come back to a mix anytime. I can come back to a mix from 3 years ago, and it'll be exactly the same.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's just, they want to, do something to it. You need the backing track for a film, whatever. But what I do is you send out files, send them to Australia. Dave gets back to me, talks to me on the phone, or sends me an email with notes, comments, and I'll tweak it, and it goes back and forth, and I don't have to patch in anything. It just stays here. It's solid.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's great, and the plugins sound great, and I've learned to work with them.
Great.
Sorry, I wanted to finish that.
Oh, no. That's by all means. Ed, what advice to any up-and-coming producers and engineers that are listening to the show right now, what would you give them? Follow
your instinct. That's all I have to say. Believe in yourself. Follow your instinct. That's where it's going to come from. And I can only speak for myself. And that's what I've done my entire life. Followed my instinct. Just go for it. Yeah, that's and get paperwork.
Absolutely.
Follow your instinct and get the paperwork done.
Ed, we want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah.
This was really an incredible conversation, not only about, your career, but about music and a time, in terms of looking back, that music is, as you pointed out, music really led the culture, in those years. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah,
we
thanks,
really
Ed.
appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rich. Eric, thanks for thinking about me and having me on the show. It's good refreshing my memory about these things. I'm getting older. I get these things down before before I forget who I am.
Yeah, we're all getting older. That's part of the and it seems like we're getting older faster and faster.
It goes really quick these days. Yeah, man.
It does. Thank you again so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure speaking with both of you.
What a great interview. What a great guy.
Yeah.
I really love the conversation with him. He's so authentic and so real. And, the thing that I loved about this conversation, Eric, was that he is somebody who totally goes on instinct and feel.
That's exactly what I was going to say. And I really love that things came to him, I guess, through that. He said it was almost spiritual in nature, some of these projects that were falling into his lap almost. And so I felt that that's something that we've heard from a lot of our guests, whether it's been on the podcast or on the Insider series. You hear that a lot, that they say that they trusted their gut.
Absolutely. And just, the different ways that things naturally, I mean, the whole story about, working with Jagger and then being called to Barbados, and then, Ron St. Germain taking him to a show, or taking Jagger to a showcase, and how that all worked in terms of him getting
The Living
Color gig, how that happened. And then there was the other one of Tony Bon Jovi, showing up in his life years later and inviting him to become the chief engineer
At the power station,
Exactly, when Tony was opening that up way back when. I mean,
I think it definitely was serendipitous, a lot of the things, because even back to that story about Living Color, what I thought was even more striking was when that him and Vernon Reid had food at the house. I think they were frying fish, and he had just picked up that record.
Right.
And
great story.
And he was just like, oh my God, what do you mean? That's what I grew up, learning how to play guitar. And it was at that point he hugged him, and it was like, that's it. The deal was sealed at that point. So it gets back to, again, networking and just being a personable person, I think, is sometimes how you land these gigs. It's just serendipitous.
Exactly. And just the way he and it was such a fluke thing that he even found that record. He never even knew if it came out.
That won multiple Grammys.
Street.
That album won the Vivid record ended up winning multiple. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So
yeah, and also, I loved what he said too about the idea of making records doesn't really, that the studio itself isn't really the most primary factor, and that his favorite records of his own career, which is quite extensive, were the Talking Heads 77 and the Ramones records, which he made in a smaller little commercial studio, a 16-track commercial studio, with like carpeting and dead room, and yet, if the songs are there,
right,
that was the most important thing, rather than, making, we've all heard records that are made in phenomenal facilities of, mediocre, mediocre material or mediocre acts doing them in the most spectacular fashion, but it doesn't really change the nature of the work. And I thought, coming from a producer who's made that many records and that many, seminal records,
right,
that's a very important thing that I think sometimes today we forget.
Yeah, and I loved that he talked about, again, getting back to the people thing, that he really likes to, almost like when we were talking to Joe D'Ambrosio about that, he likes to break bread with the bands, and he likes to get to know them in that pre-production process where he gets in there, gets a feel for whether this is going to be great or whether it's going to be a train wreck. And I thought that was really, it really goes back to his innate nature of how these things came to him, because I guess he is a people person. After that interview, I've never met Ed, and I felt like we already had a connection.
And so did
he.
And
he said it during the interview.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. So I guess it lends itself that he just exudes that kind of thing where you want to kind of be sucked into his world. And, he said that he was a confidant with some of these artists that were coming to him with his problems. And so just interesting how that all kind of tied in to his success.
Absolutely. And it even goes to the question of, the non-creative qualities that he looked for. He said exactly what you just said, that he's a people person and it's all about the people. And I believe, Joe D'Ambrosio is like that as well. It's all about the people. And if you don't have the people, if you don't have those skill sets, it's just not gonna work.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor. Show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.